The night my mother stood up at my cousin Petra's engagement party, raised her glass of sparkling wine toward my brother Aaron, and announced to 63 relatives that he was the entrepreneur this family had always needed. I was sitting 3 seats away with a company valued at $4.2 million that she had never once thought to ask about. Aaron had opened a clothing boutique 6 weeks earlier. One rented storefront on a side street downtown, $10,000 borrowed from my mother, and an Instagram page with polished filters. She called him bold. She called him brave. She told the whole room the family finally had someone who understood what it truly meant to bet on yourself. I set my fork down carefully. For 6 years I had been running a digital operations and brand strategy firm from a proper office suite in the business district. 8 employees. 43 active clients spread across 4 states. Vendor partnerships built through years of honest, consistent work. My name was on a commercial lease, a registered trademark, a business license, and a revenue report that had grown every single quarter for 4 straight years. I had started it in a spare bedroom the year my father passed away, because he believed the most honest thing a person could do with their time was build something real. My mother knew I had a business. She described it to relatives as Naomi does digital work for other companies. She said it the way you talk about someone still searching for their real path. She turned to me that evening with her glass still raised and asked, "Aren't you proud of your brother?" I smiled. I said yes. I said nothing else, because I had learned long before that moment that the people who cannot see what you have built will always be the last to understand it. I picked up my fork and finished my dinner. The applause for Aaron went on. I let it. My name is Naomi Wade. I am 34 years old, and until the night of that party, I had believed, perhaps naively, that quiet results would eventually speak more clearly than any introduction I could give them. My father, Harold, was a structural engineer who worked for the same firm for over 20 years. He never boasted or sought applause. Whenever I showed him something I had made, whether a school presentation, a business draft, or a contract I had just closed, he read it fully before he said a word. Then he would look at me the way someone looks at something they're genuinely proud to have been part of. He died of a heart attack 6 years ago, on a cold Thursday in October, when I was 28 and had just handed in my resignation from a corporate role to start my own company. I kept going anyway. A large part of why I did was because of him. Aaron is 2 years younger than me. He is charming the way some people naturally are without seeming to work at it. He has started and abandoned 4 different ventures in the last 8 years. A fitness certification he never used. A food truck concept that stopped at the planning stage. 2 retail ideas before the boutique that both faded out quietly within months. My mother funded every single one with money, encouragement, and a belief so steady it never seemed to register the pattern underneath it. She was supportive of me in the ways she knew how. She asked if I was eating enough. She reminded me that smart was not the same as settled. What she never did was ask how many clients I had, what my revenue looked like, or what I was building toward. When she praised Aaron that night, something inside me shifted. Not sharp anger. Something quieter and more certain. The kind of feeling that comes when a decision has finally stopped, waiting to be made. I was at my kitchen counter the morning after the party, still in the clothes I had slept in, when my senior account manager Ren called me before 7 o'clock. Ren had been with me since the firm's 2nd year. She was organized, honest, and one of the few people in the office who would tell me a hard truth without softening it past the point of usefulness. When her name appeared on my phone that early, I knew something was wrong. She said she had been hearing things. Not exactly rumors, but conversations she could not let sit any longer without telling me. She said Aaron had been stopping by the office over the past 2 weeks, sometimes before business hours, once on a weekend when she happened to be catching up on work. He had been talking to the junior staff. He had been describing himself as a consultant connected to the firm. He had been suggesting, without saying it directly, that I was pulling back from day-to-day operations to focus on other interests. I stood very still at the counter. She said she had not said anything sooner because she thought it was a one-time thing, a misunderstanding she could correct on her own. But 2 days before the party, one of our newest clients had called asking to confirm whether their lead strategy work would now be handled by a different contact, someone named Aaron, whom they had apparently been introduced to via email under the company's name. An email under our company name. I thanked Ren, told her not to do anything yet, and asked her to document everything she had seen and heard, date by date, detail by detail. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I was not panicking. I was thinking the way I had learned to think when something serious needed handling, not with noise, but with complete clarity. I needed to know exactly how far this had gone. I went to my home office and pulled out the personal business file I kept separate from everything at the office. I had been careful with legal documents since the firm's first year, keeping copies of important papers in a fire-resistant box at home. My father had taught me that. He said never keep everything in one place. As I went through the file, I found what I was looking for inside a pale yellow folder I had labeled Administrative Updates from the spring of the previous year. It was a form I had signed 8 months earlier, during a period when I was managing 3 large client renewals at the same time and recovering from a 2-week illness. My mother had called during that stretch and said Aaron wanted to help with some basic administrative tasks, answering calls, collecting mail at the office, helping with scheduling, while I was stretched thin. I had signed a general business contact authorization. It allowed Aaron to receive correspondence on behalf of the firm for administrative purposes and to act as a secondary point of contact for non-contractual communications. I read it 3 times. It was not authorization to represent the firm professionally. It was not permission to introduce himself as a consultant. It was not clearance to contact clients or vendors. But in the hands of someone willing to stretch the meaning of words carefully chosen for a narrow purpose, it was enough of a foothold to cause real damage before anyone thought to question it. What it could not do, under any reading, was give him ownership of anything. The firm itself, the registered trademarks, the client contracts, the operating accounts, and every piece of intellectual property the business ran on, were held in my name alone through a legal structure my attorney had set up in the company's first year. Aaron had a key to the mailroom. He had decided it opened every door in the building. I closed the yellow folder. I called my attorney. My attorney Paul had been handling my business legal matters since the firm's 3rd year. He was calm in the way that good attorneys are, steady and efficient, not given to dramatic responses when a clear-headed one would do far more. I told him what Ren had shared and what I had found in the yellow folder. He asked me to send him copies of the authorization form and said he would have a full picture for me by the following morning. While I waited, Ren sent me her documentation, and what I read made the coffee in my hand go cold. Over the past 6 weeks, Aaron had introduced himself to at least 4 of our vendor contacts as the firm's new operations consultant. He had attended 1 vendor lunch using my business card, which he had apparently helped himself to from a box in the front office. He had contacted 2 of our smaller clients by email using a personal address formatted to look like our company domain. And he had told 1 client directly that I was transitioning away from day-to-day operations to focus on larger strategic projects, which was why a trusted family member would be their new point of contact going forward. He had done all of this in 6 weeks. He had done it while my mother was posting photos of his boutique opening and calling him our family's entrepreneurial spirit. What stayed with me was how prepared it all seemed. He had not stumbled into this. He had watched how I operated long enough to understand the surface of how things worked, the names, the relationships, the vocabulary, and he had used all of it deliberately. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan. I sat at my desk and let that settle into place the way hard truths do, not comfortably, but completely. Then I made a list of everything I needed to do next, in order of importance, and started at the top. Paul called me back the following morning with a voice that was steady and precise, the way it always was when the facts were clearly on one side of the line. He said the authorization form I had signed was limited in scope and was not, under any standard interpretation, permission for Aaron to represent the firm in any professional capacity, contact clients, or use the company's name, branding, or contact details for personal business purposes. Everything Aaron had done that Wren had documented fell entirely outside the form. More importantly, Paul confirmed what I already knew but needed to hear stated clearly. The firm itself was untouchable by Aaron. The operating agreement, the trademark registrations, the client contracts, the business bank accounts, and the intellectual property, including our strategy frameworks, proprietary processes, and client documentation, were all held in my name alone. No part of the legal structure gave Aaron any standing to act on the firm's behalf, to claim any share of it, or to authorize anything in its name. What he had was the appearance of access. He had a foot in a door I had opened for a narrow, specific purpose, and he had tried to use it to walk through walls. Paul said I had two options. We could send a formal cease and desist immediately, or I could allow things to surface naturally for a short period to build a fuller record, and then act from a position of complete documentation. I asked him which approach gave me cleaner results in the long run. He said the second, without hesitation. I told him to prepare the cease and desist and hold it ready. I would tell him when to send it. In the meantime, I asked him to put together a full legal summary of the firm's protected assets, so there was no room for anyone to question what was mine and what was not. I felt the ground under my feet become very solid. 2 days later, one of our longest-standing clients, a regional supply chain company we had worked with for 4 years, called the office looking for me directly. Wren took the call. The client said that a man named Aaron had reached out the week before, told them I was reorganizing my team, and offered to handle their quarterly brand audit himself. He had sent them a proposal document. It used our firm's logo and formatting. Wren told them she would have me follow up directly and called me the moment the client hung up. I called the client myself that afternoon, apologized for the confusion, confirmed that their account was being managed exactly as it always had been, and told them that the communication they had received was not authorized by the firm. I kept my voice professional and did not explain more than was necessary. The client was relieved. They said something about the contact had felt off from the start. That evening, I received a call from our primary print vendor, a woman named Simone who had worked with the firm for 3 years. She said Aaron had contacted her the previous week, asking for a cost estimate on new branded materials. He had mentioned it was for a rebranding initiative and had used the firm's account number from a document he must have photographed in the office. Simone said she had been waiting to hear from me before she said anything, because the request had not felt right. I thanked her and confirmed clearly that no rebranding was underway and that no order should be processed for Aaron under any circumstances. What struck me as I made these calls was how much Aaron did not know. He understood the names and the surface details, but he did not understand the systems underneath them, the processes, the relationships built over years, the quiet institutional knowledge that makes a business actually function day to day. He had learned just enough to be dangerous, not nearly enough to succeed. My mother came to my apartment on a Wednesday evening. She had not called ahead, which meant the conversation had already been decided before she arrived. I let her in. I made tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and waited. She said Aaron had been telling her that things at the firm were tense. She said he felt I was being cold and uncooperative. She said she understood I was probably still processing some feelings from the party, that it was natural to feel a little overlooked sometimes, but that I needed to understand Aaron was just trying to find his footing, and I was making it harder by shutting him out. I let her finish completely. Then I asked her one question. I asked when, exactly, she and Aaron had planned to tell me that he had been contacting my clients and vendors using the firm's name without my permission. She looked at the table. I asked if she knew he had sent emails using our company's domain format to accounts I had spent years building. I asked if she knew he had attended a vendor lunch with my business card. I asked if she knew he had told at least one client that I was stepping back from operations. She said Aaron was only trying to learn the business. She said he had initiative. She said I had always been unwilling to share what I had been given. That last sentence sat in the air between us. I asked what exactly I had been given that I had not earned myself. She did not answer that either. I told her I loved her, that I was not going to have an argument, and that I needed her to understand that what Erin had done was not initiative. It had a legal name. And I was handling it carefully, which was the only reason I had not already used that name in front of anyone outside this conversation. She left without finishing her tea. The call that changed my understanding of the full picture came from a banker named Frederick, a loan officer at the branch where I had maintained the firm's business account for 5 years. Frederick was formal and careful by nature, which was part of why his call felt so significant. He said he needed to confirm whether I had authorized an application for a small business development loan in the firm's name. The application had been submitted 10 days earlier. It listed my firm's operating history, revenue figures, and client portfolio as the basis for creditworthiness, and named Erin as the lead applicant with my firm as the financial backing entity. I told Frederick clearly that I had not authorized any such application. I told him Erin had no authority to represent the firm in any financial capacity whatsoever. I asked him to halt the application immediately and to document that the authorization claimed in the submission was false. Frederick said he had suspected something was off. He said the revenue figures used in the application matched our firm's actual numbers closely enough to suggest the applicant had access to internal documentation. He said he would be placing a hold on the application and flagging it for formal review. After I hung up, I sat with the full shape of what Erin had been doing. This was not someone trying to learn from me. This was a deliberate attempt to use the credibility of something I had spent 6 years building to fund something he wanted for himself, without my knowledge and without my consent. He had borrowed my mother's money to open a boutique. When that was not enough, he had tried to borrow against my life's work. I called Paul. I told him it was time to move. I asked him to prepare not just the cease and desist, but a full documentation package covering every recorded incident. Paul said it would be ready within 48 hours. While Paul worked on the documentation, more information came in. Ren forwarded me a message thread she had found on the firm's shared internal communication platform, the system we use to coordinate work across the entire team. Erin had been added to the platform by a junior staff member who had been told incorrectly that I had approved his access. In the thread, Erin had been giving direction to the junior team. He had told one of our content associates to pause the strategy work for a long-standing education sector client because he was going to, in his words, rework the approach. He had told another staff member to redirect a client's monthly report to him first before sending it out. He had begun changing small things, one at a time, the kind of changes that might not be noticed immediately, but would pile up into serious disruption if they continued unchecked. What he did not understand was that every strategy framework we used had been developed over years of real client work. The language, the structure, the timing of our recommendations, all of it was built around the specific way our clients operated. You could not rework it from the outside without knowing the full history of each relationship. You could not redirect reports without disrupting the trust that made clients stay year after year. I sent Ren a message telling her to remove Erin's access from the platform immediately and to restore all paused work to its original status. I asked her to contact the affected clients directly, apologize briefly for any delay, and confirm that their accounts were operating normally. Then I drafted a short message to the full team. I kept it professional. I stated that no one outside the firm's leadership was authorized to give operational direction, and that any such instructions received recently should be disregarded entirely. I did not mention Erin by name. I did not need to. Every single person on that team already knew exactly who I was referring to. Ren called me on a Friday afternoon, and this time her voice had a different quality in it, not her professional tone. The voice a person uses when something has happened to them personally and they are not quite sure how to begin. She said Erin had gotten hold of the payroll adjustment form for the current pay period. She did not know exactly how. She believed he had asked one of the newer admin staff to pull it for him, telling them it needed a routine correction. He had submitted a version with her hours reclassified, which had the effect of reducing her pay for that period by just over $300. When Ren had gone to the office manager to ask about the discrepancy, the manager had produced the form with a correction notation on it and had assumed it was legitimate because it had come through the normal administrative channel. $300. For Ren, who had been with me since the second year and had helped hold the firm together through some of the hardest stretches of building it. I told her I was correcting it immediately and that she would have the full amount before the end of the day. I also told her I was sorry. Not the professional kind of sorry. The kind that means you understand exactly what something cost another person in ways that go beyond the money. After I arranged the correction with the office manager, I sat at my desk for a long time. Up until that moment, I had been handling everything carefully and quietly, thinking about legal protection, documentation, and the firm's long-term interests. I had been patient in the way you are patient, when you trust that the right strategy will produce the right result. But hearing Ren's voice on that phone call changed something. It stopped being a business problem I was managing at a careful distance. It became something I was not willing to allow to continue for a single day longer than was legally necessary. That evening, I went to the closet in my spare room and opened the box of my father's things. I do not open it often. There is a weight to it that I am not always ready to carry on any given day. But something about the week I had been through made me want to sit with his handwriting for a little while. Near the bottom of the box was a worn brown notebook he had kept for years to write down thoughts, plans, and observations. I had read parts of it before, but not all of it. I turned the pages slowly until I came to an entry dated from the year Aaron and I had briefly worked at the same company before I left to start my firm. Aaron and I had both been considered for an internal promotion that year. My father had attended a dinner where both of us were present. He had written this. Aaron talked about the promotion for 30 minutes without once asking Naomi about her work. Watch the one who needs to be seen more than he needs to do the work. That kind of hunger is not ambition. It is something else entirely. I read it 3 times. My father had seen it clearly years before I had allowed myself to look at it directly. He had written it down the way he wrote everything, not to be dramatic, but because he thought carefully, and found it useful to have a record of what he noticed while the moment was still fresh in his mind. I closed the notebook and held it for a long time. There was something both painful and clarifying about that entry. Painful because my father was gone and I was sitting with it alone. Clarifying because it confirmed that what I was dealing with was not new. It was not a sudden change in Aaron or a situation that had appeared without warning. It was a pattern my father had named long before I was ready to. I put the notebook back carefully and went to bed. The next complication arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a call from our industry compliance office. Every year, the firm was required to submit a set of certified documentation to maintain our standing as an approved digital operations provider for clients in the financial sector. 3 of our 43 clients were financial sector accounts, and those 3 alone represented nearly 40% of our annual revenue. The compliance officer asked to confirm that all updated certifications had been submitted on schedule. I said yes, of course. She said she was following up because someone had called her office the previous week on behalf of the firm and told her representative that the submission timeline was being rescheduled due to an internal restructuring. She said the representative had noted the call came from a man named Aaron, who identified himself as our operations director. We did not have an operations director. I ran operations myself. I asked her to disregard that call entirely and confirm that all certifications were current and on file, which they were, having been filed by me personally 2 months earlier. After I hung up, I thought carefully about what would have happened if I had not caught that call. If the compliance office had accepted Aaron's story and the submission had been deferred, the firm would have been at risk of losing its certified status in the 3 clients. 40% of revenue. Gone. He had no idea what he had nearly done. He had called an industry compliance office and told them we were restructuring, probably believing it sounded important, without knowing what that claim could trigger. This was the pattern of someone who understood nothing of the structure underneath what he was touching, only the surface of it. Someone who had watched from the edges long enough to learn which names to use, but not what those names actually protected or how much was riding on them. Paul received my call within the hour. I told him I was done waiting. It was time. Ren came to my apartment on a Thursday evening with 2 other members of the team. Cora, our brand strategist, and Ben, who managed client account logistics. They had come together, which told me they had talked before deciding to make the trip. They were not asking me to go to war. They sat at my kitchen table and asked, carefully and directly, whether the firm was going to survive what Aaron had been doing. They asked because their rent, their car payments, their families, and in Cora's case, her mother's ongoing medical costs, were all connected to the stability of this company. They deserved a straight answer. I gave them one. I told them the firm's legal and financial structure was solid. Everything Aaron had touched was being documented and addressed. Within the week, every access he had to anything connected to the firm would be fully revoked, and I would be in direct contact with every client and vendor he had reached. 6 years of careful work was not going to collapse because someone had decided that access was the same thing as ownership. Cora asked if I had known this was coming. I said not the exact shape of it, but I had understood for a long time that the firm's greatest vulnerability was not in the market or competition. It was in people close enough to watch how things ran without ever understanding why they worked. Ben asked if there was anything they could do. I told them the most useful thing was to keep serving clients at the standard the firm had always held. The best protection for the business was not what I did legally. It was what we continued to produce every day. A record so consistent and so clearly excellent that no outside interference could make anyone seriously question who had actually built this place. They nodded. We stayed at the table a while longer. Then they went home, and I got back to work. 2 days after Ren and the others visited, Aaron called me directly for the first time since the party. His voice had the steady, practiced quality of someone who had thought carefully about what they planned to say. He said he thought we should have an honest conversation. He said he had been trying to help with the business while I was busy, that he had seen an opportunity to contribute and had taken some initiative, and that my response had been disproportionate. Then he said he wanted access to the firm's client contact database and strategy template library to build out his boutique's marketing approach, since the firm's frameworks were the model he had been trying to follow. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then I asked him to clarify what he meant when he said the firm's frameworks were the model he was following. I asked if he meant the frameworks I had developed, tested, and refined across 6 years and 43 clients. He said yes, those. He said since we were family, it made sense to share them. I told him that the databases, templates, strategy documents, and process frameworks of the firm were the proprietary intellectual property of the company, protected by registered trademark and operating agreement, and that none of them would be shared with him under any circumstances. He said that was not a very family-oriented response. I told him that family was not a substitute for authorization, that what he had been doing over the past 6 weeks had caused measurable damage to client relationships, staff morale, and the firm's compliance standing, and that he would be receiving formal communication from my attorney within 48 hours. His tone shifted. He asked if I was seriously threatening him. I told him I was not threatening anything. I was describing what was already in motion. He hung up. I sat with the quiet for a moment. It felt different from the party. Cleaner. Like the first genuinely honest exchange we had ever had. The following week, I arranged individual meetings with 6 key people connected to the firm. 3 long-standing clients, 2 vendor partners, including Simone from the print house, and 1 industry contact whose professional opinion carried real weight in our regional business community. His name was Roland, and he had been in the field for over 20 years. I did not ask any of them for help. I did not ask them to take my side or say anything publicly on my behalf. I met with each of them personally, explained that I was aware there had been some unauthorized contact made in the firm's name recently, confirmed that it did not represent any change in my role or the firm's direction, and asked them to direct all future communications through our standard channels. Each conversation took less than 30 minutes. Every single person said the same thing in their own words. They had already sensed that something was off, and they were glad I had reached out directly. Simone said she had worked with me long enough to know that what she had seen in Aaron's requests did not match the way I ran things. She said the details were too loose, the language too vague, the requests too general for someone who actually understood the work at any real level. Roland said something I thought about for a long time afterward. He said a business built on genuine expertise announces itself differently from one built on borrowed credibility, and that anyone paying close attention can tell the difference within a single conversation. I thanked him. He said there was nothing to thank, that this was simply how honest professional relationships functioned. After my last meeting that week, I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home. I had not started any of those conversations looking for reassurance, but there was something in the collective weight of them, in the quiet confirmation that the people who mattered had always seen clearly. It settled something in me that had been unsettled for a long time. The full extent of what Aaron and my mother had been planning came to me through an unexpected source. One of our admin staff, a young woman named Faye who had been with the firm for less than a year, handed me a printed email thread one morning. She said she had found it while clearing out the shared administrative inbox, and that something about it had told her I needed to see it. The thread was between Aaron and my mother, dated 3 months before the engagement party. In it, they discussed in concrete terms a plan to have Aaron formally registered as a co-owner of the firm by first leveraging the administrative authorization I had signed. They planned to then supplement it with a second document my mother believed I could be persuaded to sign if the request was framed around my father's wish for the family to work together. My mother had written that she believed I would agree if approached at the right moment, after a family gathering when I was feeling included and generous. She wrote that the engagement party was a good opportunity to lay the groundwork. Once Aaron was on paper as a co-owner, the boutique's growth could be funded through the firm's accounts as a legitimate business development investment. They had been planning this for 3 months before the party. The evening had not been a careless moment of favoritism. It had been one step in a deliberate sequence. I read the thread twice, printed a second copy, and added it to the documentation package Paul was building. Then I called him. Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, this changed the nature of what we were dealing with significantly. It elevated Aaron's actions from unauthorized conduct to what he called an organized attempt to obtain business assets through false pretenses. I asked what that meant for our next steps. He said we needed to move decisively, and very soon. I arranged to meet Aaron at the firm's office on a Thursday afternoon. I kept my text message to him neutral, saying only that I wanted to discuss the future of the administrative arrangement between him and the company. He replied that he would be there. When he arrived, Paul was already seated in the small conference room. Aaron's expression shifted the moment he saw Paul. It was the look of someone who had prepared for one conversation and walked into a completely different one. Paul placed a document folder on the table. He told Aaron, in precise and unhurried language, that the administrative authorization I had signed was formally revoked as of that morning. Aaron had no further standing to represent the firm in any capacity, including client communication, vendor negotiation, platform access, payroll administration, compliance correspondence, or financial applications. Then Paul placed the full documentation package on the table. Every incident Ren had recorded, the client calls, the vendor contacts, the business card, the loan application, the platform access changes, the compliance office call, the email thread between Aaron and my mother. Aaron looked at the folder. He did not open it. He said I was overreacting. He said he had only been trying to help. He said the firm was a family asset in spirit, even if not in name, and that our father would have wanted the family to build something together. I waited until he finished. Then I told him my father had written about him in his personal notebook years ago. I did not read the entry aloud. I simply told him it existed, and that my father had been a man who noticed things clearly. Aaron looked at me for a long moment. Something behind his eyes adjusted. Paul told him that if any further contact was made with our clients, vendors, platforms, or financial institutions, we would be filing in civil court and reporting the loan application to the relevant financial authorities. Aaron stood up, straightened his jacket, and left the room without saying a word. For a few days after the meeting, everything went quiet in a way that felt almost too clean. No calls from Aaron. No messages from my mother except a single line saying she needed time to think. The office was steady, clients were settled, and Ren told me the team felt noticeably less tense than it had in weeks. Then, midway through the following week, Aaron's boutique landed a feature in a local lifestyle publication. A full-page spread with polished photographs and a quote from Aaron about community, creativity, and following your instincts. My mother sent me the link with a message that said simply, "See? He is doing it." 2 days later, she sent another message saying that Aaron had received a significant wholesale order from a regional retailer and that maybe all the difficulty between us had been unnecessary. She wrote that she hoped I could see he was capable of succeeding on his own and that my response had been excessive for what had amounted to a few misunderstandings. I read both messages and turned my phone face down on my desk. I did not respond to either of them. I had been in business long enough to know what a single good week meant and what it did not mean. A publication feature and a wholesale order, while genuinely positive, did not erase a debt load, an unauthorized loan application, or 6 weeks of systematically misrepresenting yourself to other people's clients. There is a specific kind of quiet that falls before something difficult becomes impossible to deny. I had felt it before. In the weeks before a client's contract fell through, in the days before a market shift registered fully. I recognized the texture of it. I went back to work. I kept my head down. I focused on the accounts that needed attention and let the quiet be what it was. I did not say anything to my mother. I did not need to. What was coming would say it far better than I could. 2 weeks after the lifestyle feature, during the period Aaron had presented to my mother as proof of his momentum, things began to unravel in the way that poorly built things always do, when the weight they were never designed to carry finally catches up with them. The wholesale retailer who had placed the large order canceled it. During routine supplier verification, they discovered that some of the boutique's product sourcing documentation was incomplete. Aaron had submitted partial supplier certifications when placing the wholesale application, apparently expecting to fill in the rest afterward. The retailer had a strict compliance policy and withdrew the order entirely. At the same time, the boutique's primary social media account was flagged and temporarily suspended after a competitor reported that 3 of Aaron's product photos had been taken from another brand's catalog and reposted without any attribution. Then on the Thursday of that same week, a former part-time sales associate Aaron had let go a month earlier posted publicly about her experience working at the boutique. She described irregular pay schedules, last-minute shift changes, and a working environment she called disorganized and dismissive. The post gained significant traction in local business circles. By Friday, I had received 2 separate calls from professional contacts in my network, asking whether I was still associated with Aaron in any capacity. I told both of them clearly and briefly that I was not. My mother called that evening. Her voice had none of the confidence it had carried in her messages from the previous week. She said things were more complicated than she had realized. She said Aaron was overwhelmed. She said the debt from the initial setup was higher than expected, and the wholesale cancellation had left a gap he did not know how to close on his own. I told her I was sorry to hear it. I told her I would call her in a few days. I did not say anything else. The truth was doing everything that needed to be said. 3 weeks after the boutique's difficult stretch, I received a call from Roland. He said he had been thinking about something since our conversation during my rounds of client and vendor meetings and wanted to run an idea past me. Roland represented a mid-sized brand consultancy that had been operating for over a decade in an adjacent market to the one my firm served. He said his company had been looking for a strategic partner to expand into the digital operations space, a discipline they recognized they needed but had not been able to build effectively from the inside. He had spent the past month reviewing several options. After our conversation, he said, and after some research into the firm's track record, he believed we were the strongest candidate he had found. He proposed a co-development arrangement where his consultancy and my firm would build a joint service offering. The financial terms he outlined included a significant equity contribution from his side, shared project revenue, and access to a client base that would more than double the accounts I was currently managing. I asked for a week to review the proposal document he sent over. I spent that week reading every page carefully, running the numbers, consulting with Paul about the legal structure, and talking through the practical side with Ren. Ren's response, characteristically direct, was that the numbers were solid and that Roland's reputation in the field was well established. At the end of the week, I called Roland and told him I was ready to move forward. What I kept to myself, though I thought it more than once, was that none of this would have been possible if I had allowed Aaron's interference to continue unchecked. The 6 weeks of his maneuvering had forced me to have direct conversations with every significant contact in my professional network, conversations I might otherwise have deferred for months. Those conversations had re-established the record of who I was and what I had actually built, clearly and in person. Sometimes damage done to you opens doors you had not thought to reach for. The week I signed the preliminary partnership agreement with Roland's consultancy was also the week I formally closed every remaining connection between Aaron and the firm. Paul filed the full revocation of the administrative authorization with the relevant business registry. The firm's mailing address was secured under my name alone. The shared internal platform was fully audited and access restricted to current authorized team members. Every vendor and client contact received a brief, professional communication confirming the firm's current structure and the correct channels for all future correspondence. I also submitted the documentation of Aaron's unauthorized loan application to the bank's fraud review division, as Paul had recommended. I did it not out of anger, but because the application had falsely represented the firm as a financial backer for a transaction I had never approved, and leaving that uncorrected in any official record was a risk I was not willing to carry forward. The final action was the simplest. I called the lifestyle publication that had run the boutique feature and clarified, without accusation, that there was no professional affiliation between my firm and Aaron's boutique, and requested that any reference to the firm in their online version of the article be removed. They complied within 24 hours. When everything was filed, corrected, and confirmed, I sat in my office after the last team member had gone home for the evening and looked around the space I had built from nothing. The desks, the equipment, the organized filing systems, the framed client milestone certificates on one wall, the service agreements in their labeled binders, the whiteboard covered in strategy notes from our most recent team session. None of this had happened because someone handed it to me. None of it had stayed mine because someone protected it for me. Every piece of it existed because I had shown up, done the work, and refused to let any difficult season define the limit of what was possible. That was not something anyone could file a form to revoke. I did not run a campaign to restore my reputation. I did not post a statement. I did not call contacts to tell them what Aaron had done. I had learned from watching good businesses operate that the truth, given enough space and enough time, manages itself more effectively than any announcement ever could. Over the weeks that followed, the picture became clear to everyone who was paying attention. The lifestyle feature that had briefly made the boutique seem like a rising success story quietly disappeared from the publication's website. The wholesale cancellation became known in local supplier circles, the way these things always do. The former associate's post continued to circulate. Roland's consultancy announced our partnership through their official channels with a clean professional statement that included a paragraph about the firm's 60-track record, its client base spanning 40-plus accounts, and its established regional vendor network. Several industry contacts reached out to congratulate me. More than one of them mentioned they had heard some confusing things in recent months about changes at the firm and were relieved to see the record set straight. Simone sent me a handwritten note. She said she had been in business for over 20 years and had seen this kind of situation before. She wrote that the businesses that survive it are the ones that do not mistake noise for substance, and that I had handled everything with more steadiness than most people manage. I read the note twice and put it in my desk drawer. What I had not anticipated, and what I found genuinely moving, was how little I needed to say. Every professional relationship I had invested in over 6 years held firm. Every client whose account had been touched by Aaron's interference remained with the firm. Every vendor partnership survived intact. The structure had been built carefully enough to absorb the interference without breaking. No one needed to say a word against Aaron. The facts stood in full daylight, and the people who understood business simply read them. I let them read. My mother came to my apartment alone on a Saturday afternoon in November. She had not called ahead, but her face when I opened the door was different from every other version of it I had seen over the previous months. There was no performance of calm in it. No practiced confidence. She looked like someone who had finally run out of the energy it takes to keep telling yourself a story that no longer holds together. I let her in. I made tea. We sat at the same kitchen table. She told me the boutique was in serious difficulty. The debt from the initial setup, combined with the lost wholesale order and the social media suspension, had left Aaron in a position he could not manage on his own. He was behind on his lease. 3 supplier invoices were significantly overdue. He had gone back to my mother for help, and what she had available was nearly gone. She said she was not asking me to fix it. She said she understood now that she could not ask me that. But she said she needed to tell me that she had been wrong. Not just about the loan application and Aaron's actions at the firm. She said she had been wrong for much longer than that. She said she had spent years talking about Aaron's potential while watching what I had already built, without ever fully registering the difference between the two. She said she had attended every one of Aaron's launch events and had never once visited my office in 6 years. She said the party had not been a careless moment. It had been the most visible expression of a habit she had never examined honestly enough. I looked at my mother across the table. I could see the difference between guilt and genuine understanding, and for the first time in a long time, what I saw in her face was much closer to the second. I told her I heard her. That was all I said, but I meant it completely. In the spring of the following year, I relocated the firm to a larger suite on the 4th floor of a building I had admired from the street for years. The windows faced east and filled the space with long morning light. The Roland partnership had expanded the active client base to 61 accounts. I had brought on 3 new team members. Ren had been promoted to Director of Client Strategy, a title she had earned many times over before I made it official. I kept my father's notebook in the top drawer of my desk, not as a reminder of what Aaron had tried to do, as a reminder of what my father had seen in me long before the world had any record to confirm it. My mother and I were finding our way back to each other slowly, the way you rebuild something damaged not by one event, but by a long pattern that finally became too clear to ignore. She visited the new office once in March, walked through every room quietly, and stopped in front of the framed client milestone wall for a long time. Then she said, "You built all of this." I said yes. She said she should have said that a long time ago. I told her she should have, and I told her I was glad she was saying it now. Aaron was still working through the boutique's consequences. We did not speak. I did not wish him harm, but I carried no obligation to soften what his own choices had produced. What I understood, standing in that new office on opening morning with Ren and Cora and Ben and Roland and Simone and a room full of people who had believed in the work, was the same thing I had understood the night of the party, only more clearly. The truth had always been there. Steady, complete, and patient. I had simply let it wait until the room was ready to hear it.